Today, we're going to dive into a single word, a word that has caused centuries of debates and, let's be honest, a lot of division within Christianity. It's a concept so difficult that many people think it shouldn't be discussed at all. We're talking about the struggle with predestination. Think about things that just feel quintessentially American. This list right here, it's like cultural shorthand for comfort, for tradition. But, alongside these symbols of what we all share, there's another really powerful, kind of unspoken tradition in American culture. It's a rule a lot of us learn from a pretty young age, right? It's like this unwritten code of conduct for polite conversation. And it's all designed to keep things from getting messy. I'm sure you've heard it before. It's the go-to phrase meant to keep the peace at family dinners and office parties. Why? Well, these topics are just seen as way too divisive, too personal, and they're almost guaranteed to start an argument. And that's the real question, isn't it? What do you do when a single theological idea carries all the emotional weight and, frankly, the explosive potential of a political firestorm? Well, you get one of the most forbidden topics in the Christian faith. So why is this idea so off-limits? The discomfort really starts with the word itself. Just say it out loud. It feels heavy, doesn't it? For a lot of people, it doesn't sound like a concept of grace or comfort. It sounds more like a sentence that's already been passed down, with no appeal. This is all the baggage that comes packed with that one word. It just conjures up these images of fatalism, this idea that we're all just helpless puppets on a string. It can suggest a cruel God, playing games with our lives. And it's almost always tied to this historical caricature of a grim, tyrannical John Calvin. With all that, it's no wonder so many people just instinctively push back hard. But here's the real tension. Despite all this negative baggage, despite this deep-seated desire to just avoid the topic altogether, the source material argues that for Christians, ignoring it, well, it's simply not an option. And this is the crucial point. The conversation doesn't start with John Calvin, or any other theologian for that matter. It begins with the biblical text itself. And the argument goes, if you take the Bible as your authority, you are forced to confront this idea head-on. Take this for example. The Apostle Paul writes to the church in Ephesus about being chosen before the foundation of the world. And then, in the very next breath, he uses the word predestined. It's right there, plain as day. And it's not a one-off thing. Just a few verses later, in the same chapter, he does it again. He links predestination directly to God's purpose and God's will. This clearly isn't just a passing mention. And then you've got this really famous passage in the book of Romans, where foreknowledge and predestination are laid out as part of this divine sequence. So the argument is pretty clear. Since the Bible brings it up and brings it up repeatedly, believers have a duty to at least wrestle with what it means. Now, to really understand this struggle, it helps to look at the personal story of the source's author, R.C. Sproul, because he didn't start out as some champion of this doctrine. Oh no. In fact, he was one of its biggest critics. This was his battle cry. It sounds dramatic, kind of patriotic, right? But he meant it. He saw the doctrine of predestination as a direct threat to the very essence of human liberty and dignity, and he was absolutely ready to fight for that liberty. And this wasn't some passive disagreement. We're talking through college and deep into seminary, he was actively arguing against it. He apparently made himself a total pest in the classroom because he was just so determined to dismantle this reformed view of predestination that he disliked so intensely. So, what changed? How did he go from give me free will or give me death to accepting this doctrine? Well, his intellectual battle eventually pushed him into a personal crisis, a moment where he had to choose between his own preferences and what he believed the text was actually telling him. This right here became his guiding principle. He wrote this note to himself, kept it right there on his desk, a constant, kind of haunting reminder to check his own biases at the door and just submit to the text, wherever it might lead him. His surrender wasn't a single event. It was more like the result of a perfect intellectual storm. Imagine this. On one side, he had his professor, Dr. John Gerstner, a brilliant Calvinist scholar. On another, he was getting pinned down by the powerful arguments of the theologian Jonathan Edwards, all while he was doing this intense, one-on-one study of the book of Romans in the original Greek. You could say the Apostle Paul himself was the fourth member of this formidable team. And that's where he finally hit a wall.
According to his account, he just could not find a way around the Apostle Paul's direct, forceful arguments in Romans chapter 9. It was the final piece of the puzzle that forced him, very reluctantly, to concede.
But Sproul's personal struggle, that's just a small picture of a much larger historical conversation. This is not a new debate, not by a long shot. This is a debate that's been waged by some of the greatest minds in the history of the church.
This debate has echoed down through the centuries. On one side, you have these absolute titans like Augustine and Calvin, who really emphasize God's sovereign choice. And on the other, you have equally respected figures like Pelagius and John Wesley, who championed human free will. The point here is, this isn't some fringe argument. It's a central theological fault line, with giants on both sides of the divide.
And that debate is just as alive and well today. You got influential pastors like John Piper on the Reform side, while beloved authors and evangelists like C.S. Lewis and Billy Graham held views that really emphasize human choice. What this shows us is that really sincere, thoughtful people can study the exact same text and come to very, very different conclusions. So where does all of this leave us? Well, the source concludes not with a demand for you to agree, but with a call to engage. The real value isn't necessarily in arriving at one specific conclusion, but in the process of wrestling with the text for yourself. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Beyond this one specific theological debate, this whole story asks a much bigger question. In a world that loves easy answers and shallow takes, which ideas are so important, so fundamental, that they are worth the difficult, sometimes even painful process of the struggle?